the Europeans did this too. I mean, I'm not excluding them. They certainly jumped in too and said, oh, we can't deal with Hamas. Because they were waiting to hear what the United States wanted to do. So I do think elections will help us get beyond this division. It might take 2 rounds of elections, unfortunately. In other words, it might take 2 to 4 years to get a unified Palestinian leadership. But there definitely are, just as Israelis are having indirect talks with Palestinians, Palestinians are having direct or indirect talks with Palestinians.
Don't you need a unified recognition of Israel's right to exist, which you don't have now? I mean, you know, talking about, again, you're talking about Hamas and
I know this is like, Israel will refuse to deal with anybody, and America will refuse to deal with anybody until everybody recognizes Israel's right to exist. Okay, does Israel recognize Palestinian right to a state with the 1967 borders? No, these are all negotiable points. But the fact is, if you're negotiating, you're implicitly recognizing that that is your enemy that you have to deal with. And that, frankly, Hamas has said that with nuance. Again, it's all cultural nuance, but it's still like, well, we can come to terms. I mean, they didn't say we will negotiate, we will recognize Israel's right to exist. But this is where we were, folks, until 1993, when Henry Kissinger in 72 or 73 said we will not recognize the PLO until it renounces violence, recognizes Israel's right to exist, recognizes UN Resolution 242 and 338. I mean, this is where Americans can really delay any positive movement for 20 years. Thanks, Henry Kissinger, for saying that we can't deal with terrorists. Of course we can't deal with terrorists, and yet we do. So we can say this, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, sure. They also do great healthcare and kindergartens. These are the Palestinians, these are the guys in control. We don't maybe like who they elected. I have a Roman Catholic friend in Jerusalem who voted for Hamas. Why? Because the PLO was so corrupt that she wanted anybody but those guys. And of course now she regrets her choice. But Palestinians are not, they're not just like all a bunch of Hamas people, or half of the Palestinian community is not just a bunch of Hamas type people. No, they voted for an opposition movement. Something similar happened in Jordan. They voted for an Islamist party the first time. The next round of elections, they voted them out of office. In Egypt, this happens as well. In Lebanon, it happens. So Islamist movements, whether you like them or not, are there to stay. They're part of the cultural fabric of these Arab countries that we're talking about. Hamas is there. Can it be moved over? Absolutely. Just like the PLO. We moved the PLO to negotiate with Israel. We can move Hamas as well to negotiate with Israel. But it's not going to happen when we choke Gazans to death. That's going to give more authority.
Who's choking them?
The Egyptians, the Israelis, the Americans. I don't know if you've heard about what's going on in Gaza. I mean, Israel has closed off all things. They won't allow supplies in. They won't allow medicines in. They'll allow some food in. The Egyptians also are building an underground fence to prevent the tunnels. So you can't even get medical supplies in to Gaza unless you go through all of these Israeli controls or Egyptian controls. So that's who's choking.
But sadly, they exist for a reason. I mean, it isn't exactly that they just put up these controls for no reason. That people in Israel have been living under fire from Gaza, and they're just protecting themselves. So, I mean, it becomes it's an unfortunate, bad situation.
Clearly. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering about the connection with American national security, I guess, and international security. And I couldn't help but think, what if, is it possible that this World War III that was talked about would actually happen in the future? And if it doesn't happen, or if it doesn't seem to be possible, then why are we so embroidered in this mess?
What are our national interests at being involved in Israel and Palestine? Great question. There's no oil there.
Nope.
natural gas.
Yeah, so it's like, why are we even there?
It's a great question. Yeah. Do you have any idea why we're there?
That's why I'm asking.
seems like this conflict right from the beginning was a test of internationalism in a global order of things, and it still is today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
There's a religious aspect, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian history is right there in Jerusalem. But I wanted to ask you, you were in response to an earlier question, you said you like the one-state solution. And of course, you also talk about the wall. Well, the wall Israel's put up. First of all, as far as the one-state solution is concerned, you look at the history. Look at a country like Lebanon. What happened to Lebanon? When they had Christians and Muslims trying to work things out. And it was great. I understand it was a very nice country at one time. Now let's forget it. And as far as the wall is concerned, they were put out only primarily because you had these terrorists, not only the rockets, but people coming into a pizza shop and blowing themselves up. How do you reconcile these things? How do you work these things out if you're going to have a one-state solution?
It's a great, I want to emphasize the wall part. The wall was constructed over many years, started by Ariel Sharon, I think 2002 or 3 or something, and absolutely had an impact on terrorism. Terrorist attacks dropped to virtually nothing. So the wall has cordoned off Palestinians, kept them in the West Bank, no question, and Gaza was already kind of encircled and fenced in and everything else, so that too. And yet Palestinians go back and forth. So the wall has had that direct impact. But the problem is, again, it's like, think about the statistics of 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What does Israel become? I mean, think about what Israel has to think about. Do we become, Jimmy Carter wrote that book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. He didn't have any commas in there either. He put Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, because he wasn't sure where to put the comma. Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, question mark? I mean, his point in that book is, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, yeah, Palestinians will be the majority. And in 30 and 40 years' time, will be the vast majority in terms of, but if there's no Palestinian state, if there's only a Jewish state, and again, the Jewish agency quote I gave is the same thing. It's like, what do? We have to solve this so that the Jews maintain their Jewish homeland. That's what they want. That's what they wanted for forever. That's fine. You still have 20% of the population not Jewish. And then what about the Palestinians? Do you control them? Do you give them rights? Do you give them rights of citizenship? So if you make the one-state solution, you stop being a Jewish state, but you're democratic. If you create a Palestinian state, withdraw from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and parts of East Jerusalem, you maintain the Jewish and democratic character of the Jewish state. I'm just positing, what are the options here? I'm not, I declared what I thought was going to be, but that's, as I say, that's a wonderful dream of mine, but it ain't going to happen. I know that. So I'm more inclined, sir, your question about why do we care? We care because people care. People care for different reasons, and yet we do care more about this Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Delaware-sized area more than we care, it seems, about any other place in the world. So we all have our own reasons why we care, why we're involved, why we want to see peace and justice for Palestinians and Israelis. The question is, how the hell do we get there? And what I'm trying to do is maintain my Americanness, which is a very vulgar thing at times. But that's what I try to maintain, because I think about the history of this, and I think about, there's so many analogies that you can talk about. Palestinians, eating their own, killing themselves, killing Israelis killing them, back and forth. Okay, we can just spin down that forever and ever and ever. I'm just trying to not stay back from it, but take a look at it and see where we can also quickly engage. And I think, I'll just finish this editorial, sorry. And I think it's where we find there's so much activity on the ground in Israel and Palestine for people who are trying to do this. And they don't get the attention. They don't get the press. They don't get the support. Read the Israeli press. It's so much better at analyzing Israeli, Jewish, Middle Eastern society than certainly the rest of the world's press. And yet, if you mention anything critical in America, you're anti-Israeli, you're anti-Semitic, all this other stuff. Read the Israeli press. They're trying to figure this out better than we are. because they can engage it. They can engage in a nitty-gritty, down and dirty. This is the reality we face, and the wall is great. The wall is great for anti-terrorism, and it's horrible for human rights and justice and security for Palestinians. So, do you want to interact on all these other? You want to ask? No?
It seems like actions of Palestinians can have an impact on Israeli elections, and actions of Israel can have an impact on Palestinian elections. And you would think that both sides would have an interest in having more moderate candidates be elected on the other side as a better peace partner.
Right.
And yet it seems most often they do things that result in the harder line, more extremist person or party getting elected on the other side. Why is that? Or do some people want a harder line person elected on the other side?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, there's definitely a sense of, well, this is just ours. It's just ours. These Palestinians, they'll go. Palestine, Jordan is Palestine. We can dump them over the River Jordan. No, we'll take care of them. We can isolate them here or there. But this is the land of Israel, all of it. And it's just, okay, we can't deny that. I mean, these are people that just see it that way. And there's Palestinians like, there is no Israel, there's no Jewish state. This is Palestine, occupied by the Jews, okay. And we'll outrun the bastards in terms of our demography in 20, 30, 50 years. So why should we bother negotiating now? We'll just fight the fight until our great-great-grandchildren will inherit the earth. I live now, and I think there is that reality. There's no denying. There's extremists on many sides of this. But what I want to emphasize is there are so many wonderful activities going on, real activities like demonstrations and Israeli Jewish lawyers working for Palestinian human rights in the Israeli courts or in the international courts even. But that activity, there's a little town, little village, I think it's called Bil'in, that has daily or weekly demonstrations, Israeli activists, Palestinian activists, grassroots organizers. I mean, we don't hear about all of these grassroots organizers that are actually trying to build peace from the ground up. And that's why, again, I say, we're not Lebanon. I know Lebanon is a problem, and it is beautiful again until maybe Hezbollah and Israel get at it one more time, and Israel takes care of that, as Hezbollah threatens the north of Israel. I mean, there we go, that war again. But so I don't think Israel would be Lebanon, but I do think over time, whether it's 2 states, again, it's not going to be 1 state. Some people say there should be 3 states. 3 states. Israel, Gaza, West Bank. No. Or Jordan, Palestine, which is Gaza, and West Bank, and Israel. That's back to the Shimon Peres and Nabil Shaf dream of a unified economy. So again, we can address it all over the place, but every time we try this, yes, someone comes in, blows somebody up, or starts an attack, or condemn, even if it's just a condemnation, or something stupid that's said by some Hamas leader, and the whole world is up in arms. Hamas doesn't recognize Israel. So what? So what? Does Israel recognize, the Palestinians, or even Hamas? Hamas was duly elected. Do we vote for them? Are we upset? I mean, do I want the moral majority? Well, I guess they already are in charge, or have been in charge. But, I don't like religious extremists in charge of my country, and I'm sure I wouldn't if I was Palestinian or Israeli. But we divert our attention so much because of these things, because they press our buttons. Israel has a right to exist. Okay, that's great. But they didn't recognize that. Oh, well, let's stop everything until they do. So, again, step back a bit, get it extra. One of the wonderful things I like about the Oslo process is that it was the Oslo process and not the Washington process. It was the Norwegians, of all people. Again, the whole process, infrastructurally, architecturally, as a process, was doomed to fail. But it was a really good idea at the time, and that is that Norwegians got together, got Palestinians and Israelis together, started talking about real solutions. And again, I guess I'm almost going to applaud George Bush. You know, the roadmap, at least he put markers along the road, but he didn't do anything with them. Like, there's the markers, and settlements, we talked about this, and settlements. No, let's have peace process and more settlements. I mean, that's insane. So who's the referee in all of this? There's only one. And we're not doing a good job of it. We're failing miserably. Yes, yes.
I'm questioning whether or not there is a group of the next generation, shall we say, of people coming into Israel and maybe hopefully into Palestine that are tired of their precious being killed, maimed, whatever, and they want peace. And my feeling is until that happens, nothing's going to happen.
There are victims' families, Palestinian Israeli victims' families that do that. They go around the country, at least the Israeli country, together. It's hard to do that in the West Bank, but they do go around Israel and say, you know, enough. Talk about enough. Enough's enough. And these are Palestinian and Israeli parents whose children were killed by the other. Again, I think it's time we, look for those things and highlight those things and somehow facilitate those things more than, the arms buildup and the denial of rights and the denial of existence and the denial of what size table we're going to have in the negotiating room and all of that stuff. It's, the United States we're not a panacea. We're not just going to do it. We're just going to fix it. But without us, it certainly isn't going to happen. Yes?
Just a small tactical question. Is George Mitchell being successful at all, or can he not do much without the engagement of the president?
He is a tactical figure, for sure. Obama's the strategy, and Mitchell is the tactic, to be sure. Is he softening up, as they say, the Palestinians and Israelis with these indirect talks? Okay, it seems so, and we applaud it reluctantly. And yet the settlements go up, and I don't think we'll have a terrorist attack, it seems, because those things seem to not happen really anymore. But then again, we've got Hamas, and they might lob something over the border, and yeah, there's always that. But yeah, is he being successful? It's hard to say because so much of this is done behind the scenes. The fact that we have indirect talks is it's like, oh goody, better than nothing. But it's like, why aren't they having direct talks? They did that for 17 years. Anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next week, when we'll be talking about the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan with Professor